Welcome to the mythology of the Morrigan, battle crow, phantom queen, or the great mother goddess herself. Welcome back, my friends, to another episode of Deity Tracker, where we track various divinities through the forests of myth and time and culture and find what they mean for us today. So a few of you have asked me to do this video on the Morrigan, An Mór-ríoghan, a figure in Irish mythology, tell some of the stories from the mythological cycle, from the source material themselves, and then maybe pull the camera back a little bit and look at some of the comparisons in different mythologies from Europe, maybe other Celtic mythologies, wider European and Indo-European mythology. See where the Morrigan might crop up in history and archaeology, and then ask, what any of this might mean. Let's begin with the name of the Morrigan. It's obviously a title rather than a name, the Morrigan, a bit like the Dagda, another Irish deity, the Dagda, the good god. The Morrigan is a little bit more complex, and there's a few different conventions. Typically, the translation of the Morrigan is the phantom queen, more kind of is related to the English word nightmare, the nightmare queen, you might say. Some people also suggest that Mór might refer to the great queen. So this is perhaps a suggestion that the Morrigan is maybe an aspect or an evolution of the great goddess herself in some older mythology. But there's definitely a dark aspect to her. So in a nutshell, the Morrigan usually associated with war, with battle, with death, with crows and ravens and various other death-related animals, wolves and snakes and things like that. She's also more than that. She's also related to fertility in the land, to sexuality, to sovereignty, to prophecy and kingship and fate. So there's a lot going on with the Morrigan. She's a really interesting figure, very, very multifaceted. So I'm just gonna dive right into the actual mythology, Irish mythology, where the Morrigan appears, and try and sort of weave some story. Irish mythology is itself quite, it's like a Gordian knot or a Celtic knot. It's quite complex and curly-whirly. So I might just kind of collate a few different pieces from here and there to kind of to tell a bit more of a story. So the earliest text reference to the Morrigan isn't in the mythological cycle or anything like that. It's actually in some early medieval glossaries. Glossaries are basically kind of annotations in the notes of some other book not related to the Morrigan, essentially. So in these marginal notes, the Morrigan is referred to plural. She's referred to as the Morrigan, the plural of the Morrigans, if you like. So in these glossaries, she's referred to as a kind of spectre or female demon, a class of ghost, if you like, called Morrigans. This relates to maybe the concept of the banshee in later Irish folklore. There's also a really interesting annotation in a early translation of the book of Isaiah, where Lilith, Adam's first wife, the mother of demons, is referred to as a Morrigan, plural. So that's really interesting. It just gives us an idea of the kind of area we're in. Morrigan, mother of demons, a kind of malevolent spectre, a class of malevolent spectre in the earliest textual evidence. The other place she's mentioned in glossaries is in reference to another goddess called Macha. I'll get on to Macha later because there's normally a triptych of goddesses, and that's what this annotation says, that Macha is one of the Morrigans, one of the Morrigan. Macha is another kind of fertility and land and sovereignty goddess. So already there's a bit of a duality here. In the very earliest text evidence, there's a duality with the Morrigan. She's a kind of malevolent spectral entity and a class of fertility mother goddess, if you like. So she's both of these things at the very earliest written evidence. So that's just an interesting prologue for the Morrigan. So let's get into the actual mythology. I'm going to start with the mythological cycle because in chronology, it's the earliest cycle of Irish mythology. It happens first. The Ulster cycle and the Fenian cycle temporally happen later, if we can think of, linear time in terms of mythology, which we probably shouldn't. So the mythological cycle, if you don't know, contains things like the Book of Invasions. It's the story of how Ireland came to be populated, first by the Tuatha De Danann, the children of the goddess Danu, the god people who came from afar, a supernatural race of beings who populated Ireland. They kicked out the Firbolg and were the inhabitants of Ireland in the myth age. And then later they have to defend Ireland from the Fomorians, these kind of demons that kind of come over the sea or perhaps under the sea, the Fomori. So the Morrigan is one of the Tuatha, one of the Tuatha De Danann, one of the god people. She's one of three sisters in some sources, Macha and the Morrigan and Badb the crow. And all three are said to be daughters of a mother goddess. Triptychs are really popular in Celtic thought in general. 3 in 1, 1 in 3. And there's many schools of thought whether this is 3 separate goddesses or 3 aspects of the same goddess. There's another triptych of slightly more benevolent goddesses as well, mentioned in the same breath. So there's kind of 3 darker ones and 3, lighter ones. Of these 3 goddesses, Macha and Badb and the Morrigan, it is said in the text, the Morrigan whose name is Anu. Who's Anu? There's 2 mountains in Ireland, or hills, called the Paps of Anu, the breasts of the goddess Anu. I'll show a picture here because they really do look like a big pair of dicks. Some people speculate that Anu is actually Danu, the great mother goddess, the children of the goddess Danu, which would make it weird because it would mean the Morrigan is her own granddaughter or great-granddaughter. Something cyclical going on there. Now, maybe we shouldn't apply kind of genealogical logic to Irish myth. We probably shouldn't apply logic to myth whatsoever. But this is an interesting point because it just means it almost suggests that the Morrigan is both this crow-like war battle goddess, but also the great mother of all at the same time. Both things are true. So let's put that aside for now. Where does the Morrigan appear in the mythological cycle? Well, she helps the Tuatha defeat the Firbolg and the Fomorians. She leads one particular side to victory in battle. That is one of her main functions. How does she do this? There's a really interesting story. This story, by the way, is not mentioned in many, many books of Irish mythology. It did not even appear in an English translation until very late in the 20th century. I think the Victorians kind of swept it under the rug because it's just too weird and sexy. And this is it. The Dagda, the good god. If you don't know who the Dagda is, maybe think Thor. He's big, he's ginger, he's got a big club that he hits stuff with, he's got a massive penis that drags along the ground, creating gulfs and gullies and shaping the landscape. He's a big, strong fertility god, and he's magic. He's the good god. He's good at everything. Now, in this story, he is looking for the Morrigan because he knows that she can turn the tide of battle. And the Tuatha have a big battle ahead. They've got to fight the Fomori. So, the Dagda goes looking for the Morrigan, for the Phantom Queen, the Great Queen herself. And he finds her. He finds her just outside of modern-day Sligo. She's huge, mind. So is the Dagda. In the mythological cycle, the gods are massive. They seem to kind of shrink over time. But in the earliest mythology, they're fucking huge. 200 feet tall, at least. He finds the Morrigan with 1 foot either side of a river. Sovereignty. Threshold. Death. She has foot either side of the river and she is naked and she's washing her bits. She's washing her genitals in the river. She has 9 tresses in her hair, sometimes dripping with blood. 9 tresses, really symbolic number. 3 is kind of the totality of everything. Underworld, middle world, overworld, past, present, future. In many mythologies, 3 kind of represents everything. So 9 represents 3 times 3. It's the entirety of conceivable everything. Another suggestion that the Morrigan here is kind of the great mother. She's everything. I digress. The Dagda, coming along butt naked, hairy and ginger with his big pot belly, finds the Morrigan washing her fanny in the river. And I don't quite know how, but the Dagda's, he's a charming lad and he manages to seduce the Morrigan, and they are on the bank of the river, nice, dirty, pagan magic. And in so doing, the Dagda wins the Morrigan over, and she agrees to win the battle for the Tuatha, to defeat the Fomorians. And she says, I will defeat the Fomorian king and eat his kidneys and drop handfuls of blood in this very river. You could say this is the union of the divine couple, right? This is Shiva and Shakti. That famous image of Shiva lying prone on the ground and Kali standing above him, riding him. This is that. This is the union of the creative and principle of the void. All creation is made through this union of male and female. Earth, Mother, Sky, Father, all of that is implied in this union of these 2 vast titans, cosmic beings, copulating on the banks of the river. This is a strange piece of ritual sex magic. As I say, it's often cut out of Irish mythology. The Morrigan is true to her word in the battle with the Fomori, in the second battle of Moytura. The Fomorians are routed. Balor of the baleful eye, he's like the Cyclops. He's like Goliath. He's got this big eye that shoots laser beams that eviscerates whole armies. I've told this story on this channel if you want me to tell the whole story of the Battle of Moytura and Balor of the Evil Eye. But essentially, the Tuatha are victorious, and the Morrigan is absolutely instrumental in this. So before the battle, the Morrigan and her 2 sisters, or maybe 3 aspects of her, are raining down spells on the enemy. They're sowing confusion. They're bringing in mists to blind the Fomorians. They're raining down blood and piss and fire on their heads. They're making them hallucinate and creating terror in their minds. Badb, the battle crow, this is a classic Celtic sort of magic act, is standing on one leg and has one eye closed while she rains down darkness and blood and fire on the enemy. We're going to return to this image of one-legged and one-eyed, because we see this in all the way through Celtic folklore, with magical giants or druids. They're always standing on one leg and have one eye closed. There's some symbology to this that is now possibly largely lost, but we always see it. It's really interesting. If ever you read a story and someone's standing on one leg and has got one eye closed, there's something very old about this. Anyway, I digress. These 3 battle goddesses, these 3 battle crows, are raining down chaos upon the enemy. At one point, it is strongly implied that the Morrigan or Badb, one or the other, as I say, they're sometimes interchangeable, is flying over the battle in the shape of a crow or raven, or maybe even a whole flock of crows or ravens, just shaping the battle and calling, egging the Tuatha on and prophesizing the end of the Fomorians. And they are shitting themselves because the Morrigan has appeared. And if the Morrigan says, you're all going to die, you're all going to die. There's no escape. The Fomorian king, she destroys him with magic. She actually bursts his heart inside his body and liquefies his innards. So he shits out his whole innards out of his hole, basically. It's a horrible way to die, I expect. So she can gather his blood and dump it in that river. Also, in this battle, Lugh, the young hero Lugh of the long arm, he blinds Balor, his grandfather, with a sling. But that stone, as it flies through the air, is literally guided. She scoops it up and guides it through the air and poof, lobs it through Balor's one eye so forcefully that his eye bursts out the back of his head. His eye is like a magic eye that can eviscerate armies. His eye bursts out the back of his head, lands in his own side, the Fomorian forces, and boom, like a nuclear explosion just eviscerates them all. So the Morrigan just wins that whole battle for the Tuatha. And then she praises them and says, "You are victorious." But then she does a really weird thing. She prophesizes the end of. He says the Tuatha will be scattered and lost eventually. Ireland will have darkness laid upon it, and the whole land will be laid to waste. So, bit of a double-edged sword there. Yes, you've achieved victory in this battle, but you're all going to be as nothing one day, because I say so. So that's the Morrigan in the mythological cycle. That's kind of the earlier cycle of Irish mythology. A crow goddess, a war goddess, a goddess of prophecy, a goddess of sovereignty, a goddess of deciding who wins in battle, and a goddess of magic and witchcraft as well. And also a part of a triptych of goddesses, Macha, Badb, and the Morrigan. So 3 in 1, 1 in 3, potentially. So all of these things are already there in the mythological cycle. Next time the Morrigan pops up, and her sisters, particularly Macha, is in the Ulster cycle. I mentioned Macha earlier, one of the sisters of the Morrigan, or perhaps another aspect of the Morrigan. Macha sort of means fertile plain, kind of a grassy, green, fertile plain. So she's a field, basically, but she's also associated with horses and fertility and the right of kings and the right to rule and sovereignty, a bit like the Morrigan. So, lots of crossovers there. That's why a lot of people say actually she's an aspect of the same god. But on the surface, she seems a little bit more rosy, less fearsome, less of a fearful aspect and more of a benign aspect. Not always, though. So, the Ulster cycle, particularly the cattle raid of Cooley, which is sort of the main event in it, is basically about a husband and wife arguing about a cow. Basically it. If that seems trivial, it's not. If ever there's a magic cow in mythology, this goes right back to the Bronze Age. This is Indo-European. This is the cosmic cow of creation, probably, theoretically. So, to cut a long story short, Macha, in an earlier event, she's forced to race one of the king's horses because she can run so fast while pregnant. She outruns the king's horse, but then gives birth there on the finish line, and she curses all the Ulster men for putting her through this indignity and curses them to go through the pangs of childbirth at a very, very inconvenient time. So this will come up in a minute. So the cattle raid of Cooley. In short, I don't want to go through all of this because it's basically, it's like the Irish Iliad or the Irish Mahabharata. It's connected to that same strand of Indo-European mythology and probably goes back very, very, very far. But in short, it's about an argument over a cow. There's Queen Maeve of Connacht and the King of Ulster, and they're they're having pillow talk one night, and they're arguing playfully over who is wealthier, and they count all their treasure and all their livestock and all their castles and all their soldiers, and they realize that they've got just about the same amount of wealth, except the King of Ulster has a magic brown cow, and Maeve is jealous and wants that cow, so she sets about stealing it. So if you want a magic cow and the owner of the magic cow doesn't want to give you the magic cow, you might as well go to war. Wars have been started over more trivial things. As I said, it's no ordinary cow. It's the cosmic cow of creation. So Maeve and her army is marching into Ulster. Unfortunately, because of the previous curse, all the Ulstermen are absolutely useless. They are crippled on the ground in pangs of labour, just like they were giving birth. The only Ulsterman who is immune to this curse is a particular hero called Cuchulainn, the Hound of Cullen, the great hero of the Ulster cycle, probably the greatest hero in all Irish mythology. Sorry, Finn McCool, but he is. Cuchulainn, by the way, has this special ability where he's basically the Incredible Hulk. He can warp spasm and turn into this muscle-bound, ferocious monster that attacks through any enemy and is pretty much invulnerable. So the army of Connacht is coming. All the Ulster warriors are incapacitated. It's only Cuchulainn. So what does he do? Classic. He stands on a bridge, on a ford. Again, this ford symbolism, this liminal space, this transitional space, this place of death. So Cuchulainn is there, and he's just all the armies of Connacht are coming, and he's just cutting through all of them, slicing off limbs, cutting off heads. All the champions are just reduced to nothing. At one point, he has to fight his best mate and foster brother, but that's another story. So eventually, in between, slicing in half hundreds, if not thousands, of brave warriors of Connacht and turning that river red with their blood, something strange happens. There's a lull in the fighting, and through the corpse-strewn battlefield, there's a chariot. And tied to the chariot is a red cow with a little bell on its neck going ding, 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 ding. And riding the chariot is the most beautiful lady Cuchulainn has ever seen. And she is wearing a multicolored dress. Multicolored, a dress of every color. That's normally suggesting of the fairy realm in mythology, by the way. Sometimes she's wearing a crimson cloak, red, the color of death. So this fairy lady appears, and she dismounts her chariot and she walks across the ford to Cuchulainn, who's kind of thinking, what is going on? And she, is very comely, and she presents herself to Cuchulainn, and she says she is the daughter of a king, and she has brought all this cattle from the realm of the Sidhe, from the other world. Magic cattle equals wealth, prosperity, kingship, all of his desires. A lot of cows in these myths. So she presents herself and says she wants to have sex with Cuchulainn, basically. He's a sexy man. She wants his body. Cuchulainn says, look, this is a bit inappropriate. I'm in the middle of, chopping off heads here. There's going to be another wave of attackers in a minute. Can we just do this later? Well, the Morrigan, because it is the Morrigan, is very, very put out by this. And she warns him, and she says, I will. I always get what I want, and I want this. And Cuchulainn says, get away with you, woman. This is man's business. Oh, the Morrigan didn't like that. So she vanished. She melted away like the wind. And Cuchulainn thinks, that's very odd. What was it? Some woman of the Sidhe. And then, just behind his ear, there's a ah. And Cuchulainn turns around, and there, in a branch of a tree, is a crow. Oh, shit, thinks Cuchulainn, and he knows at that moment that it was the Morrigan. And stuttering, Cuchulainn says, if I had known it was you, O great queen, I would not have spurned you. But it was too late. The Morrigan says, Cuchulainn, where your death is, there I am. Where your death is, there I shall be. Where your death is, there I am. I like this kind of sense of non-temporality. It means he's already dead. The Morrigan is the weaver of fates. There's no linear time here. He's already dead. His fate has been sealed. But it's Cuchulainn, right? So he's going to put up a fight. That crow takes off. So the battle commences. Cuchulainn's killing loads more people. There are many events. I'll tell this story one day, all right, properly. But, I'm just going to skip to the next bit of the Morrigan. Later, Cuchulainn is fighting on the ford, and he's knee deep in water, and he's just killing people left, right, and centre. And this eel comes up and wriggles round his legs and tries to trip him up. So, spears coming past him, people trying to hack his head off, and this eel is trying to trip him up. So he stamps on the eel and breaks its ribs. And luckily he doesn't, he gets maybe a nick on the ear, but then kills that guy and cleaves that one in half. Where's that eel come from? He thinks. I'll bet it was the Morrigan, because it was. Later, a whole herd of cattle are stampeding towards Cuchulainn, being driven by a wolf, by a great wolf. It is, of course, the Morrigan in the form of a wolf, one of the totemic animals of the Morrigan. So this whole stampede of cattle, of cows is coming towards Cuchulainn. It'll trample him to death, but he looses a sling, and blinds that wolf in one eye. So that puts pay to the stampede. But then there's one great big white bull with red ears that's charging towards Cuchulainn. It's going to gore him. A white bull with red ears. If you are familiar with Celtic mythology, you'll know what this means. It means it is a creature of the other world. Think of the hounds of Annwn, white hounds with red ears. That's in Welsh mythology, but part of wider Celtic mythos. White and red, really symbolic colours. Red, death. White often means the other world, so other world and death. This bull is charging towards Cuchulainn, and he, with his spear shaft, just breaks its leg. He's really strong, Cuchulainn. So he's smashed an eel, he's blinded a wolf, and he's crippled a cow. So much for the Morrigan's attempts, thinks Cuchulainn. Cuchulainn is the son of Lugh. He's half divine. He knows it's the Morrigan in multiple forms trying to get him. Just as an aside here, I said I'll kind of weave in some bits of other mythologies. I just mentioned the Hounds of Annwn from Welsh mythology. This shape-shifting into multiple different animals to try and get the hero, this is really strongly resonant for me of Ceridwen. Ceridwen, the cauldron of Ceridwen and the birth of Taliesin. I've told that story on this channel. I'll put a link to it if you want to hear me tell it. But Ceridwen turns into all sorts of forms: a salmon, an otter, a falcon, to try and catch Taliesin, and he's always eluding her. To me, this is this kind of shape-shifting animal motif that we see in a lot of Celtic mythology is perhaps a remnant of the idea of rebirth or reincarnation. We know from Roman sources that Celts believed in rebirth or transmigration of the soul. So maybe there's an element of that in there, as well as kind of shape-shifting, druidic, sort of dream-leaping, shape-shifting magical powers. So, I digress again. The Morrigan has tried to best Cuchulainn in the form of an eel, a wolf, and a cow. Later, much later, after Cuchulainn has laid waste to the entire army of Connacht, thousands of the brave and the good lie dead. The plains are strewn with blood. And Cuchulainn again comes to the ford, and there is a washer at the ford. There is an old woman washing his armour at the ford. So the washer at the ford is again a figure in Celtic mythology and much later folklore, not just in Ireland, in Britain as well, particularly Scotland. It's often a type of she, not a banshee, a washer fairy, if you like, but it's an omen of death. So if you, my friends, ever come to a stream and see either a beautiful young woman or an old hag with her tits over her shoulders, washing clothes and eyeballing you, back away, because it means you're going to die. It's a type of spirit. So that's linking the Morrigan again with a type of phantom or spectre, like we had at the beginning of the video. Also, in the mythological cycle, with the Morrigan standing on the with one foot either side of the river, washing her bits in the river. That's again a call back to the washer at the ford. This threshold, liminal, foretelling death theme here that's just weaving its way through all of these stories and later folklore. So Cuchulainn comes across this strange old woman washing his armour, doing him a good deed by washing his armour, but it's a bit odd. Tell you what else is odd about this old woman. She's only got one leg. She's only got one eye, and she's kind of bent over on one side as if her ribs are all misshapen and broken. She's all hunchback. He should have really put two and two together, shouldn't he? So there is this old washer in the ford, this hag, this crone. Maybe another aspect of the Morrigan is the crone. There she is, washing his armour, and she gives Cuchulainn a drink of milk to soothe his wounds. And he thanks her and blesses her. And her eye is healed. She gives him another drink of milk. He thanks and blesses her. Oh, her ribs are healed. Another draught of healing milk. He thanks and blesses her. And her leg is regrown. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Cuchulainn realizes his mistake. He is face to face with the Morrigan herself. And you know what she does? She offers him some dog meat. I'm slightly collating stories here, but you'll forgive me. She offers him some dog meat. Now, Cuchulainn is under Geish. Geish is like an oath, you know, it's an oath that nearly always ends badly in the old stories. He's under Geish. He cannot eat dog meat. Dogs are sacred, but also his name is the Hound of Cullen. So the hound is his kind of totem animal. So he can't eat dog meat. But he's also under Geish never to turn down the hospitality, the gift of a stranger. So he's in a bind. He either turns down the woman's hospitality or he eats the dog meat. He opts to eat the dog meat. He's broken his Geish, so he's doomed. He knows he's doomed. He already knew he was doomed when he spurned the Morrigan. So, some time later, Cuchulainn is in the thick of battle again. More stuff happens. He's riding around his chariot. He's killing loads of people. He kills a load of silly druids. But at one point, a great hero throws his spear, and guided by the Morrigan, it wounds and disembowels Cuchulainn. After disemboweling, I think, both his horses and his charioteer, who might as well be called Krishna, because Cuchulainn is basically Arjuna from the Mahabharata, in my opinion. Cuchulainn is mortally wounded. His bowels are hanging out, but he won't die because he's half god. So he ties himself up to a stone with his own entrails because he can't lie on the ground. That would be shameful. And his enemies, or what few of his enemies are left of the whole army of Connacht that Cuchulainn has single-handedly slaughtered, none of his enemies will approach him until finally a raven, a crow, lands on Cuchulainn's shoulder. And Cuchulainn knows, he knows that all of this, the entire story of his life, every single thing in it, the victories, the deaths, the joy, the sorrow, all of it was woven by the Morrigan, the great queen. Finally, he laughs, winks at the crow on his shoulder, thanks her for his life, and dies the greatest hero Ireland has ever known. So, that is the Morrigan's role in the Ulster cycle. Pretty dark, but it's like she respects, there's mutual respect, isn't there, between this demigod and the great goddess herself. So, now for the fun bit. Comparative mythology. We all love comparative mythology. So a disclaimer, I've said this a few times on this channel, it always makes me slightly nervous when people kind of get two different deities from different cultures and time periods with some sort of similarities and just kind of mash them together. It always makes me a bit uncomfortable. So I don't want to do that. I'm not doing that. But because that would offend the Morrigan, surely, just lumping her in with some other goddess. But on the other hand, looking at some comparisons from the totality of Indo-European mythology, if there is such a thing, maybe might help shed some light on the Morrigan and fill out the picture a little bit. So I'll start with Celtic, other Celtic Morrigan-like figures. I've already mentioned Ceridwen, who is interesting in the shape-shifting way. She has the cauldron of knowledge and inspiration associated with the passage of life and death, and also maybe the totality of all things. Ceridwen also arguably has a triple aspect. The Morrigan also has a triple aspect. Just as a side note as well, this notion that's quite popular, particularly in contemporary paganism, of mother, virgin, crone, very old idea as well as a very modern one. Does this fit with the Morrigan? I mean, she's sexy. Yeah, she's a crone, she's a hag. I don't know whether she has the virginal aspect, but then if you take her as the great mother goddess, then she probably has everything. That's a side note. But Ceridwen, we could look at Ceridwen. You could point to the Cailleach, but arguably that's a later she's a later folkloric figure, even if based on something earlier. So maybe, but I'll put her to one side. I'll leave that one with you. Also in Celtic mythology or later Celtic folklore or Arthurian folklore, there is, of course, Morgana Le Fay. Okay, so etymologically, these are not related. Morgana is from a Welsh word meaning the sea. It's actually more related to the Fomorians that we heard earlier, kind of sea demons. But she's a fae, so she is one of the she. So there's a sort of link there. And these Arthurian stories it's generally accepted that they're based on earlier, oftentimes lost Celtic folklore, not necessarily from Ireland, but from Britain and Gaul as well. So that there could be a kind of Morrigan energy bubbling up through later Arthurian folklore, manifesting as Morgan Le Fay, if you want. More than other Celtic gods and goddesses, and I might return to Celtic again when I get onto archaeology, but I would actually point to Norse myth, actually, with lots of, little lights going off for possible comparisons with the Morrigan here. Where do we find sort of Morrigan type, battle crow type energy in Norse and Germanic mythology? The Valkyries, of course, the Valkyries, these battle-hungry psychopomps, these warriors that often take the form of swans or vultures or crows above the field of battle and take glee in feasting on the dead, and are also psychopomps. They lead warriors of the dead to Asgard. Is the Morrigan a psychopomp? I don't know. That's not. She might be. That's maybe implied. I don't know. I'll leave that one with you. So the Valkyries, yeah. Hela, maybe Hela. The Norns. The Norns, definitely weaving the fates of gods and mortals. Definitely a kind of Morrigan vibe there, isn't there? But principally, it's Woden, isn't it? I know he's a male god most of the time. He's a bit of a gender bender, isn't he, with his swaying magic, and that's one link with the Morrigans. Odin is a magician. He's into serpent and swaying magic, Saidr. He is also associated with crows and ravens and wolves. He also is, he's named after Wod, battle fury, and that is very much the area that we're in with the Morrigan. He's one-eyed. Odin is one-eyed in Norse mythology anyway, as is the Morrigan in many points in Irish mythology. So there's an interesting link here, and Odin or Woden as is an ancient shamanic deity, in my opinion. So I wouldn't be surprised if we track these gods really, really far back in time. There's some sort of cross-pollination there. So Woden, the Morrigan, lots of interesting similarities there in their functions. Anyway, what about Greek? The Furies, the three Furies, the three Morrigans. That's definitely a superficial similarity there, isn't it? It's kind of rage and vengeance and that kind of thing. Hecate. A lot of people mention Hecate, and we can kind of see certainly the superficial similarities. Hecate is triple formed, and so is the Morrigan a lot of the time. Hecate associated also with sorcery and witchcraft, associated with death, associated with crossroads and liminality. The washer at the ford, just like the Morrigan. So Hecate, you could say, just kind of, brushes up against the Morrigan there in some ways. All part of Indo-European mythology. Mainly, as I've mentioned before, and a lot of people make this connection, is Kali Ma, and also Durga, this dark mother of Hindu mythology and cosmology, who's a very, very, very strange figure, feasting on the blood of enemies like the Morrigan in the Battle of Moytura. Also, this divine union with the Godhead, normally Kali and Shiva, and in that union, sometimes creating the cosmos, and that is the role of Kali as the great mother. This is interesting because, the Kali has a fearful aspect, but it's normally implied that that fearful aspect is only one side of her. It's one dimension of her. And actually she's trying to bring about the liberation of humanity and the evolution of gods and mortals. So actually it's just an illusion. It's a necessary illusion. We need that fear, that terror to shake us out of our ignorance. It's a very Eastern way of looking at it, but there is or was a bit of that lurking behind the Morrigan. So I'll leave that one with you. The Morrigan Kali Ma, great mother, great queen, phantom queen. So let's park mythology for a while. What about history and archaeology? Could the Morrigan potentially appear in any of our written sources or any archaeology? There's not a lot of contemporary written sources from Ireland, or there's none. We don't get those until the later Christian era, the 9th to the 12th centuries. But the Romans did invade neighbouring Britain, and we have lots of accounts of the Romans facing the Celtic Britons that would have presumably had similar beliefs and customs and deities to the Celtic-speaking Irish. There's a really interesting account of the Roman invasion of Anglesey. This is famously where the Romans wiped out the Druids on Anglesey, and this was a big fight for the Romans. They had to wipe out the Druids because the Druids were the seat of power in the Celtic-speaking world, and their base of operations was Anglesey, North Wales. We have contemporary sources of the Roman ships going over to try and land on Anglesey and the terrifying spectacle that awaited them. We have first-hand accounts of the Celtic warriors there with their caranxes, with druids raining down spells, raining down battle fury upon the Romans as they got off their ships that petrified them. And there's description of furious women with snake-like hair, brandishing fire, wearing black with face paint, calling down spells and incantations on the Romans. And this had a petrifying, immobilizing effect on the Roman soldiers. This, to me, is really reminiscent of the 3 Morrigans in the Battle of Moytura, raining down fire and mist upon them. These female druids and female warriors, these battle crows raining down fire and blood and mist and terror and confusion on the Romans. So an actual historical account of what is described in Irish mythology, or near enough. That's mind-blowing to me. While we're on the Roman invasion of Britain, while the Romans were invading Anglesey, what happens? Boudica, the other side of Britain, in Norwich, was rising up. Her daughters were raped. This is a matter of sovereignty. Her sovereignty was insulted by the Romans. She was promised one thing, and then righteous fury descends on Boudica, and she basically does a genocide. She demolishes Colchester and London, completely genocides the entire population. She leaves no Romans and Romano-British living. She kills everyone. It's pure battle fury, pure Morrigan. So you could almost argue that Boudica was for a while a human incarnation of the Morrigan. That's me being a bit fanciful, but hey, it's interesting that in history there's echoes of mythology that we see here. While we're on the subject of the Celtic-speaking world, I'm just going to segue into archaeology now as well, because in Roman Britain we have some interesting triple goddess finds that may or may not relate to Morrigan-type figures. We have triple goddess figures called the mothers, the matroni, bearing abundance and life. So these could be some positive aspects of the Morrigans, or the Morrigan sisters that I spoke of at the beginning of the video. We also have another triptych of statues. We don't know what these statues mean, but they're called the hooded spirits, and they're hooded, they're dark. Sometimes they've got weapons. Maybe these are Morrigans. We know nothing about them. We've just found loads of these triple goddess figures, and we don't know what they are, from Roman Britain. Maybe a relic of some British-like Morrigan type worship. Coming over to Gaul, we have a battle crow. She's literally called Battle Crow, a Gaulish war goddess whose name is Battle Crow, usually translated as Battle Crow. So could this be a French, a Gaulish version of the wider Morrigan archetype? Maybe this figure was more widely known in the Celtic-speaking world, and we just see her later in Irish mythology. Beyond the Celtic world, if the Morrigan is a great mother, then what about all these Venus figurines? What about all these vulva-shaped burial tombs found throughout northwestern Europe? These womb-like places to inter the dead. They're kind of vaginal and birth and death here. Because, as I said a bit earlier in the video, sex, death, and life, they're all interrelated. It's that triptych again. So what does any of this mean? What does this mean? I've kind of hinted already with the suggestion of Kali, the way that the Morrigan, she's often presented as a war and death goddess, but she's kind of more than that. She's fertility and life and abundance and prosperity and wealth as well. She's both sides of that coin. So maybe if we're going to take a psychological or spiritual lesson for this, whenever shit happens in your life, use it. Maybe it's a lesson. There's a Robert Bly poem. It's basically about Noah's Ark and doves flying off to find new land after the great flood.
The dove returns. It found no resting place. It was in flight all night over shaken seas. Beneath dark eaves, give the dove peace. The split-tailed swallows leave the ark at dawn. At dusk, 2 swallows shall return. On the 3rd day, the crow shall fly. The crow, the spider-coloured crow. The crow shall find new mud to walk upon.
So, my friends, if you're walking through the wasteland right now, through corpse-strewn battlefields of your life, if you're lying in a crow-feathered room, I hope you can find some new mud to walk upon. So, my friends, I think I'll leave it there now. I guess on the subject of the Morrigan, thank you for all my Patreons. I have, or rather my partner Tamsin has, recently finished these raven-feathered spoons. So these are winging their way to some of my Raven tier Patreons. Thank you so much to you guys. If you want to support my work as a mythologist and storyteller, then you can follow me on Patreon. If you are a Raven tier member, then do write to me, because I will send you a spoon carved by my partner Tamsin, or maybe an ogham stick carved by my fair hands. I don't know what tree would represent the Morrigan. The yew, probably. Maybe the blackthorn. So thank you, my friends. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.